Okay, so I just we started the meeting, and I just told everyone that we're following a new regime. We're going to try to limit this meeting to an hour and a half at maximum, and I'm
Not
going to try to
we
follow.
not we'll try, will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as God wills it. Um, so, you know, my expectation is that we will finish in an hour and a half. And I'm going to try to follow your suggestion, Leah, of you know, setting time limits on each of the components of the agenda, and going through them that way. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight that we haven't really discussed is the charter amendments that I proposed, and I assume everyone's seen them, has gotten a copy of them, and I want to go through them because I think it's important that we present them to the council. I think we can do them in pretty short order, and I want to make sure that we have time to address them. So I'm going to say half an hour to do the charter amendments. That'll bring us to about 7:40 or 7:35, something like that. Okay, so let me pull this up. So, you know, in going through the charter, it just seemed, and then trying to work out the dates and so on, it just seemed there were some things that really just don't work. And so I have come up with 4 amendments, 2 of which are about timing, third of which, the third is about a unusual provision that appears in Section G of Section 6, Part G of Section 602, allowing the council to cancel elections under some circumstances. And I'm proposing to remove that from the charter. And then finally, I'm just trying to give the council some additional eyes on proposals that the council may make about elections, election regulations. In other words, to have us as a committee to take a look at anything that they want to propose on the general subject of elections. Not that we can dictate in any way to them, but just to offer suggestions, raise issues that they might not have thought of, and so on. And I think it's just a good general policy. So let me go through them one by one. Section 602A of the VMA Charter states, quote, not less than 60 days prior to the election committee shall request that nominations be submitted to the election committee according to the election rules and procedures. And I'm proposing that we change that requirement of 60 days between the opening of the period for nominations and the election, and make the required interval be at least 75 days instead. The election days have long mandated that there be at least 45 days between the election and the date that nominations are actually submitted by candidates. In other words, the date on which nominations close. And that time period between the election and the time when nominations close has worked well in practice, allowing sufficient time for campaigning in the forum and thus providing important information to voters. However, with 45 days between the closing of nominations in the election and the current charter language allowing only 60 days between the opening of nominations and the election, that implies there's 15 days between opening nominations and closing them. And, you know, I just think that's an unrealistically short amount of time, and obviously we're not doing it this year, but it's conceivable that some future election committee might want to take advantage of that short period and decide to hold, you know, to open and close the period of nominations very quickly within that 2-week time frame. So we're allowed to do it at a slower pace, to have nominations open at least 75 days, or really as long as we want under the rules, but it must be no less than 60 days. And I think it should be at least 75 days to make sure that there's a month, you know, 30 days between the time that people are confronted with the idea that there are going to be nominations, they can put themselves in nomination in candidacy or nominate somebody else. And the day that those nominations close, in which they have to submit all of their documents and their plans and so on to the public. And so I'm just proposing to make that period a little bit longer. Any comments or thoughts on this from anybody?
It's Paul Weller. I think those are good good suggestions, and I would certainly support both of them.
Okay. The second one is section 602B of the VMA Charter. At least states at least 2 weeks prior to the election committee shall give notice of the nominations together with related candidate statements and designate the voting method, conduct, or system of the election. Well, obviously, that's not very much time at all. It really, people are supposed to be in the dark until 2 weeks before the election. They have no idea who they'll be voting for, and I just think that's not realistic. So I'm proposing to change it to 4 weeks instead, and I think that's pretty straightforward. Any comments or thoughts on this one?
Good idea.
Okay, thank you. Number 3, section 602G of the Charter reads, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in the Charter, if a state of emergency has been declared by the Governor of Maryland within the corporate limits of Martin's Additions, the Council shall be authorized to pass an ordinance, ... canceling an uncontested election. In other words, if there's been an emergency declared by the governor, the council has the right to cancel an election if it's uncontested. And I think that's a really bad idea. It's new. I think it was just instituted last year. And I don't really understand why we would want to cancel an election. In those ... where I said the council shall be authorized to pass an ordinance ... canceling, but there's obviously other provisions in there. And one of the provisions that's in there that I'm not challenging has to do with postponing an election to take account of the emergency. And that seems reasonable to me. But if you can postpone it until the emergency's over, well, then presumably there's no real need to cancel the election. And indeed, just because an election is uncontested at the time of the emergency doesn't mean it's uncontested in the long term. There may be write-in candidates, and there may be people who decide to run, once the emergency is over. So I just don't see any reason to cancel an election. And I think it's just generally not a good idea for the council to have the right to just cancel elections. It's not something that really serves the community well. Any thoughts or comments on this?
Actually, I'm sorry.
I just think it's a good idea, because what kind of emergency, if the emergency is so bad we have to cancel an election, we're probably all doomed anyway, so.
We probably what?
Are all doomed anyway, if that bad an emergency.
Well, is there a clause for postponement?
The only terms, let's look at the charter itself. Let me pull that up here. Let's see, so it's in section G. And let me just read section G. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this charter, if a state of emergency has been declared by the Governor of Maryland within the corporate limits of Martin's Additions, the council shall be authorized to pass an ordinance to implement such emergency election procedures as may be deemed necessary as a result of the state of emergency, including but not limited to changing the election date, amending nomination and notification deadlines and mechanisms, altering the method, conduct, or voting system of the election, altering the manner of balloting, canceling an uncontested election, and eliminating the use of polling stations. If the election date is changed according to this subparagraph, those persons elected to the council shall take office at the next regular schedule. So in other words, no, as long as there's been an emergency declared by the governor, the council is authorized to pass an ordinance canceling the election. And, obviously that's may have been suggested to people's minds because there was an emergency last year dealing with COVID. But, even then, we were able to proceed with the election despite the emergency. So, I'm really hard pressed to think of what the emergency could be, but emergencies certainly are reasons why people might want an opportunity to challenge or question their elected leaders, and the election is a perfect opportunity to do that, and just doesn't make sense to me to cancel the election. So I would propose.
Is there any harm from leaving it in?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Is there any harm if we leave it as is?
Well, we may end up with a canceled election. That's the harm.
Yeah,
so what that means is that people who are on the council get another free 2 years, who want to run for another term.
I was going to say, I don't think it doesn't give the existing council continued thing. It gives for uncontested election, which my read on that is if we have 2 candidates and there's 2 open spots, it's not like it cancels elections and freezes the council in place, right?
No, because there's a problem with that. Because if you have a write-in, and a write-in has actually won in an uncontested election in the past, so you have got to have an allowance for a write-in candidate.
Yeah, I disagree. I was just curious, because my read on the language was it's not like it freezes the council, it just says whoever the existing ones, and yeah, I agree. I think allowing for write-in.
George, I think it says if the election is uncontested, even if it's 2 opposing people who are running, the council can then cancel the election, and the 2 people that are already in place presumably will stay there because there is no election to displace them. So they are just automatically carried over into an additional term.
No, wouldn't their terms of office just expire? Like they're not reelected at that point.
So you mean no one would be in office?
What?
No one would be in those council seats then.
Yeah, the seats would become empty, which I'm guessing none of us can probably be in on that.
So just to clarify this,
Yeah.
what from what I understood it means is that basically if there's a minimum number of candidates to fill the seats, right? So that it doesn't matter whether they're incumbents or challengers, then they would be duly elected, as in they would become the new council members, right? So in the case that Peter is talking about, if there's 2 incumbents and they're the only people who declare for the election, then yes, they would be allowed in. But you
have to make space for a write-in,
Right.
and a write-in is not somebody that's automatically running, and a write-in has won an election.
I'm not disagreeing at all.
I think that's I don't think there should be, unless we have an atom bomb going off here, I don't see how we're going to have anything that is so bad that we have to cancel the election.
Yeah, particularly since we can do mail balloting.
Well, admittedly, I think I had a question about this last year, and part of what was explained to me was I think an attempt to think about major natural disasters, like tornado rips through the village and a bunch of people are displaced and the village office is destroyed and all this stuff. So it might be one that I think it is worth raising to the council, because I think, the ability to have write-ins is a very good call. I think it might be one to raise to them that this could potentially be a problem for people's terms would expire, and then you would be in a position where the council only has 2 members and it's not authorized to act at that point. So they might need to clean this up to be very clear about whether to get clarity on can you postpone it into what would be a new term? Because I don't know if we legally would be able
Well,
to
you know,
have.
I think we're raising ambiguities about what the term means. I interpreted it to mean that whoever's sitting in the seat at the time the election gets canceled, the election is canceled. If somebody was running, well, that's very nice, but they weren't elected.
But
They do not
Peter,
automatically
that's not the
take their
case because it
seats.
says notwithstanding, and they're elsewhere in the charter it defines their terms expire at the end of 2 years. They canceling the election doesn't extend their terms. It just means there's no one to fill. It would mean there's no one to fill a seat, and then we do run into the potential problem that the council only has 2 people sitting on it at that point. And what do we do if the council
Well,
can't act?
I think
because
that's
they
a
don't have
stronger
quorum?
reason to remove this term, because then, you know, you've got a council with only 2 or 3 people on it. So their workload goes up at the very time that they need additional people, you know, to help them do all of the resolve all the problems that the emergency has presented. I think that's even more of a reason to remove this provision. So I don't know what the proper interpretation is, and you make a good case, but I think that's all the more reason to take this out.
Can I ask for a clarification? Peter, are you suggesting taking the entire section G out or
No.
just the canceling of the uncontested election?
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
It's Tiffany.
Tiffany. I'm not suggesting taking all of Section G out. I can understand we have to do something when an emergency arises. I just think canceling an uncontested election is not reasonable. First of all, you don't know that it's uncontested because nobody's listed on the ballot, because there can always be write-in candidacies, and as Natalie points out, write-ins have won. Secondly, you know, I think the idea of just handing an additional term to the people who are already on the council without ever facing the voters, I think that's undesirable. And if we take the interpretation that George has suggested, that the council is then deprived of 2 or 3 members, and they're left with only 2 members, that's even more reason not to cancel the election. So I just can't think of a situation in which canceling an uncontested election really serves the interests of the voters. So I am definitely not proposing removing all of G. I am only suggesting the portion dealing with canceling.
I agree with Peter.
I do too.
Okay. Okay, so anything else anybody want to say about this? When we get to, I'll read the last one, and then, you know, we can talk about if we want to take anything out of this proposal before we present it to the council on Thursday. Okay, so let me read the last one. And so section 602F states in full, single sentence, the council is authorized to pass other regulations governing elections deemed necessary and consistent with this section. So they have the power to change regulations governing elections. And we're proposing to add to this section a requirement, not in any way diminishing the council's power, but simply asking them to, before they do anything that disturbs the regulations governing elections, that they come and talk to the election committee just to consult with the committee, because obviously we're dealing with these regulations in a much more detailed and personal way, see the implications of them because we have to work them through. And, you know, for that reason, I think, you know, it may be worthwhile to ask the council to come to the election committee just to have another set of eyes and a set of suggestions and reactions to a proposal to modify these regulations. And that's really the whole sum and substance of what I'm proposing there. Any thoughts?
What does it mean to consult with the committee? Like if the council sends one person to attend one meeting and say we're doing this,
Well, so,
does that
at
count?
the very least, I'm not sure of the exact terms or how to make that meaningful. I would think that we would want at least the right to talk to at least one person and submit our comments in writing to the council, at the very least. Hopefully we have a more open conversation on it. But the council obviously will set the terms for that. But I think it's a desirable thing. Okay, so
Are there someone who's more familiar with charter and general practice about the other committees than me? Like, does this requirement exist on any of the other committees? Like, is there a thing that says if the ethics or if the council is considering ordinances relating to ethics, they have to consult with the ethics committee?
it does not.
But the thing with the election committee is the election committee works on a time schedule. Ethics doesn't work on a time schedule. Social stuff doesn't work on a time schedule. But if they start changing rules in the middle of a period, that's not a really good idea. So, because we do, the election committee, whoever they will be, has a time schedule. So I think they shouldn't be changing things in the middle of a time schedule either.
For sure. I agree with
So,
that.
Natalie, what you're talking about is the potential risk that the council, nefarious council X is in the middle of the cycle, changing the thing, saying, okay, I know we said ballot or nominations must be due on the 29th, and that was agreed to in January, but now we're going to change it to the 15th, which is tomorrow, and somehow, the people who they prefer are already in the
Yeah, I think anything that they change should be done before or after the whole thing starts. And I mean, it's feasible that that they would have a good change for a good reason. I'm not saying they wouldn't, but you just can't do it in the middle of it, and you've got to do it enough before it all starts so that it can be properly set up.
So I very much agree with that, Natalie. I think that, though, is a little different than a requirement, because this would apply any time of year. This would apply if they were considering something in August for an election that's 9 months away and hasn't started yet. This seems like this would trigger that they would have to consult the committee even in August. But that's notwithstanding, yeah.
Well, it may not even have a committee in August,
Right.
but I mean, it should be something, because the election committee works on a time schedule. And even once it starts before it starts, because we're here trying to set up the time.
Yeah.
So there has to be enough time if they're going to make some kind of changes before they do it, if they consult whoever the committee is.
Right. Well, there is a time schedule, of course, and the council certainly has the power to change the rules in midstream. It seems more reasonable to me that they would change it for not the current election cycle, but for the next one,
Yeah.
or going forward from that. But of course, you never know, and that's one reason why it's good for them to consult. And I think just in general, these regulations are a little bit more complicated. If you haven't really worked it through and been involved face to face with the rules and the regulations that are there, it might be good to get someone with a more close-up view of how the regulations work and how elections run. At this point, I think the regulations that are in place, it's a pretty well-tuned scheme that nominations open at a certain time, nominations close, there's a forum, ballots go out, and there's a whole system that is in place. And it's hard to think of a reason why we'd want to change that. Not that there couldn't ever be a reason, but I guess we also have to face the reality that when changes happen, they could be, done for some reason that is self-interested on the part of the council. Council members may be running for office now or in the future, and they may try to structure regulations that serve their candidacy, or make it harder for people to oppose them. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So anyway, and anybody else? Andrew, do you have any thoughts on this?
Hey, Peter. No, not really. I'm listening. You and I, we chatted briefly. The only thing, and I just looked it up just for your awareness and timing purposes, it'll take a council vote to pass a resolution, then that needs to be, I think, posted for 40 days or 50 days. And then if there's objection by 20% or so of the village, or a call by a resident, or it's 20% of the village's signature or something like that, there would have to be a referendum.
Gotcha.
So I think there are several steps. On all of the items you mentioned, I'm looking forward to the council conversation on Thursday. I don't see anything that raises red flags.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you asking, and I'm continuing to absorb this interesting conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, at this point, I'd propose that we move to a vote. So my plan is to present these to the council on Thursday and ask them to take it under consideration. To not obviously not to have a vote immediately, but to have a vote, perhaps at the next council meeting when people have had some time to consider this. I guess we have to go through the whole system that you're proposing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to at least put these on the table, get the council's reaction, and begin the process. I guess that's my plan.
Yeah,
So,
I just wanted to say, just in terms of the timing, I think Niles knows this better. Yeah. There couldn't be a vote by the council until possibly the December council meeting. Then let's say the council approves all four,
Mm-hmm.
or 3 out of 4, or whatever it is, time wise, because it then has to be posted for 40 to 50 days. I don't know which one it is.
right.
So could I just briefly
You're
go
going to
through
run
that?
into a timing issue where the timing ones that you're interested in, the 40, the 75, and the 4 weeks.
No, because I think the concern is not, how they bind us, because we do have the freedom under the
Right.
current regulations to have those somewhat more open timing arrangements, by our own adoption of the regulations.
And this
And I
would be
guess
for
the
future
concern is
elections.
that at some future election committee, not necessarily this one.
I was just trying to explain that this is not happening obviously overnight. Now,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that.
Wise or process-wise?
So, so I'll quickly just go through this just so that everybody is on the same page. So, basically, the council can adopt an amendment like this at a regular meeting or at a special meeting, in accordance with its normal procedures. However, the law requires that a public hearing is at least 20 days prior notice. So, in other words, what we'd have to do after the if this is what is discussed at the November meeting, and if there's approval for it, then we'd immediately have to notify and have a public hearing at the December meeting. So there'd have to be a public
In other
hearing
words,
on it.
that after the council vote, then there would have to be a public
Right
hearing.
after the public, after it's sort of there, I think we would have to have a public hearing. Then next, you have to have after adoption of so it gets introduced, the council votes, or the council says yes, we're interested in these. You have a public hearing, then it is adopted, by the council. At that point, we have to have 40 days in which it gets posted at the village office and posted in the newspaper of general circulation, which means the Washington Post. So it has to get posted in their public notice section for 40 days. And then at that point, as long as there during those 40 days, there can be a petition by residents if they disagree with what the council has done. If 20% of the residents during those 40 days sign a petition to oppose what the council has done, then it goes to a referendum, and that gets added at the next election. Okay.
I see.
And then after that, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Then it gets registered with the state, which is what Ron and I do, and we don't have to worry about that. But
we're in good financial health, so we can pay for 4 of ads in the referendum. Peter, you're costing us a lot of money if this goes.
Yeah. It's just to be clear that it's 3 days of advertisements. It's 4 times during those 40 days. So in other words, it's weekly basically during that time. Sorry,
and it doesn't have to be the Washington Post, right?
Because the Sentinel no longer exists. There is no longer a newspaper of general circulation. However,
Martin's editions, maybe?
So we could. There is an interpretation that, this is from Ron, that we could potentially use our town newspaper. However, this interpretation seems to conflict with the code definition of general circulation. So he recommends that we put it in the Post. So it'd be 4 weekly ads during those 40 days that basically say exactly what we're doing. And we did this in Rockville when I was there, so I know sort of the process of how you get these type of ads posted. But that's just a brief.
I haven't read the whole charter. Did these regulations appear in the charter?
No, this is understood. This is state
any
law.
Amendment, amendment has to go via Maryland municipal law.
Yeah. So the state requires how you amend our charter, basically. So and because the charter says that, I was going to try to pull it up here, but the charter basically says that we have to amend it in accordance with state law. Then this is what state law says, but we're required by the state to say that in the charter. So it's a circular thing. It just basically means we do what the state wants, and so that way, that's just the structure. But I mean, at the same time, the council could get this ball rolling and could adopt it, at some point. This would, I think, end up being like February or something like that when it actually gets approved. But as you mentioned before, if you're not trying to do it for this election, that time scale doesn't really necessarily
right. I think
affect the work you're doing.
I think these are good general practices.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And whether that we can have them in this election or not, I think it's time to get the ball rolling on adopting these.
Mr. Chairman, I think our time is up, and I call for a vote.
All right. So we're going to have a vote, unless somebody wants to make an amendment, and we're going to ask for a vote on all 4 of these proposals to be presented to the council this coming Thursday at the regular council meeting. Okay.
Can I ask that we vote on the 4th one separately? Because I personally think that I'm not wild about the 4th one. I think it is vague and doesn't seem to wouldn't seem to accomplish what it's setting out to do. And so I'm fully in favor of the other 3, but I would like to register a no vote on the 4th one.
Okay, fair enough. Let's do that. Okay, so on the first 3, in other words, changing the, let me go through them, changing the 60 days prior to the election for nominations to be opened to 75 days before the election, to give an extra 2 weeks to potential candidates. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All opposed? Anybody? Okay. So those 3 are adopted. Did we adopt all 3, or did we just adopt one?
It would depend. So, George, let's sort of step back a second. So what you were proposing was 2 different votes. So why don't we say, George, move the first 3. And did someone want to second that, just so that we have it clearly written out for the record?
I'll second it.
Okay, Natalie seconds it. And then, everyone was for the first 3.
Okay,
Okay, so that's how it
Fair
will be then in the minutes. Now you can vote on the fourth one.
okay.
So if somebody wants to move that,
Somebody want to move on the fourth one? I believe that I cannot.
yeah, it's best practice for the chair not to move, but
I move
technically,
that we accept the fourth
yeah.
amendment.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Leah, was that a vote in favor, or were you?
Yeah.
Oh, you're in.
Yeah, she is in favor.
You're voting. You're voting yes. Okay. Okay. So that's 4 in favor and 1 against.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I view them as adopted, and I'm going to present them to the council.
Peter, can
yes.
I add one thing just for discussion? This goes back to what George had brought up at the last meeting.
Absolutely.
The question around having a runoff and the 2 weeks. Do you remember this discussion? Where the question is 2 weeks after the election, does it count as election? Ron's interpretation from what we were talking about was that the election is election day, so a runoff would have to happen 2 weeks from election day. We can get into this when we talk about dates. But if that's something that that the committee would also be interested in looking at, because that's also in the charter, that's the. I just wanted to bring this up after you guys discussed what it is, because let me just pull it up as I was doing that.
This is in the charter.
I believe so, and that was what I was.
It is, yeah. It's
Yeah, it's
602D.
Right.
In the event that 2 or more candidates receive the same number of votes where only one can be elected, there shall be a runoff election within 2 weeks of the original election. So if it's on May 10th,
Right.
That would be by May 24th. It
Yeah.
has to be the second election.
So my only point in bringing that up is if the committee would want to entertain a separate thing that would, or not a separate, but you could add it in and ask the council to look at clarifying that language, whether it's say from the time that the results are announced, might be alternative language. I'm just bringing this up just so that you guys can consider it.
Right, because we're giving 2 weeks for the mail votes.
Right, exactly, and I think we sort of were able to do that with the mail votes, partially because it was an emergency, with COVID and everything, but just for the purposes, because as we discussed before, the code allows us to postpone various things in an emergency, but it might be worth the committee. And I'm not saying that you should or not. I just wanted to, since the question was asked, put it all to you if that's another question that you want to do.
Well, I think it seems pretty reasonable, particularly with these mail elections. But I don't have language for that.
I can ask Ron to, as long as Andrew agrees with me, I can ask Ron to draft something or say, something about, again, my thought, just off the top of my head, was from the time that the results are announced. And that way, vote counting can happen separate than election day for the purposes of a mail-in vote. And we could even include that kind of thing. But I just wanted to bring that up simply because George had asked that question last time, and I got the clarification from Ron. Does that make sense, Andrew? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry, I just stepped away from monastery a little bit. So repeat that just real quickly, or I can talk offline and get back to Peter.
Right. Why don't we...
Andrew, look at the chart. If you have the charter in front of you.
Yep.
It says a runoff
2D.
within 2 weeks of the original election. So we're allowing 2 weeks from the original election just for all the ballots to get to the contractor and to be voted and counted. So if the runoff has to be within 2 weeks, either we have no time to get.
What about 2 weeks after the results?
2 weeks after the results are announced makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I mean that's
Simple practicalities.
Yeah.
Does that? Yeah.
'Cause if we eliminate the 2 weeks between election day and the vote counting, then the situation that arose last year is that, people, there may still be ballots in the mail, including the ones that we collected at the sidewalk, and we'd have to make some further kind of accommodation. I don't know exactly how we would structure the election, but
It's not official until they're announced, and then it would be 2 weeks after they're
Right.
announced.
I think
Right.
that makes
It doesn't quite make sense that if the ballots need to be sent in by a certain date and received by a certain date, that the date they're sent in is the trigger to the 2 weeks, because you don't know the results until the,
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the results.
yeah.
And we don't want to get rid of those 2 weeks because we need to make sure that all those ballots come in to the contractor.
I mean, I'm comfortable with having that conversation, Niles, and or you had that conversation with Ron. I'd be curious to know how they imagined this could be possible, except for the fact that past elections were in person and votes were counted the night of.
Right. So
Correct. Yeah.
right. I think this is one of those things where the council, where the charter, when it came to doing all these things for vote by mail, not all of these things were done because we had to do it all. Originally in 2020, we had to do it on a dime because of COVID. But I think allowing for a couple of different things to make sense in terms of a runoff is a good example of that, where we make sure that the calendar works. So I think it makes sense to at least have that discussion. So
Niles, Andrew, just for your context, I think some of this also goes back to when what was mailed before was absentee ballots.
Right.
And those ballots had to be received by the day of election.
Right.
And they were counted that same night. So you could potentially, push the ballot mailing dates to before the election, have the 2 weeks end on election day, and then be counting as, Natalie, that you guys used to do, and those absentee ballots had to be in by, I think it used to be like 3 p.m. or whatever the day of.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That's like, I don't know if present things, so we need exact language written out ahead of time, but it seems like, can't we just propose that the council change it, like Natalie said, change as the council is looking at other charter amendments, proposing that the council amend 602D of the charter to, instead of runoffs have to happen within 2 weeks of election day, it is 2 weeks of the committee's announcement of the results of the election. Do we need to have exact language that we're voting on, or can we just say that's the principle that we're proposing to the council?
So what I understand you to be saying now is you can have Ron draft this up so that it'll be ready to present.
Yeah.
On Thursday night.
Exactly. Yeah. So I can ask him to do the language. All I think is worth getting from the committee is, does this make sense? Is to have a discussion, and we can have Ron do the details on that. What were you going to say? Something?
I don't even know if to be honest with you, I don't know if we need Ron to add a few words here. I could wordsmith this, and you guys could look at it, or Peter could wordsmith it, and we could look at it. And Ron, at during the council meeting, could look and say, that makes sense. That's appropriate for a charter, language-wise. I don't think we spend an hour of Ron's time to put in 2 words that say election outcome or announcement of election outcome versus
election. Yeah. That's fine.
So,
Okay.
Okay, guys.
I'm not usually.
I'll do that and send it to everybody on the committee tomorrow. And I'm not sure what the procedure is at that point. Can we?
Yeah.
Can each person vote back to me, or?
So the language itself would be considered administrative, basically. So as long as you guys all agree now that you want to present this as a recommendation, as long as the general idea is there. If it's about changing 1 or 2 words, that doesn't really matter. It's more important that you've made this recommendation. because
Okay.
then any word changes can also be made at the council meeting. So,
Okay, fair enough.
so that's all good.
So,
I move we make that recommendation.
second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's the majority. All right, let's let's do that. I'll draft something tomorrow, and I'll send it around for comments, and then I'll include it in this list of recommendations. Okay, seems straightforward. George, if I have any questions, I'll have to be in contact with you. Okay. All right, so we're a little behind schedule already. Let's move on. Okay, about the election plan, the election rules that we have been working on now for a few weeks, and it turns out. Let's see. So at this point, I think there are two issues. One, my understanding last week was that we voted to have in-person voting on election day.
Good.
And not that we would have a hybrid election, but rather that we would have in-person voting on election day. And that was my understanding. And, you know, at Andrew's suggestion. And so I believe that the current plan that I sent out incorporates that. It does that. So the current arrangement is, so everybody gets their ballots, you know, with plenty of time to vote. Election day is May 10th, excuse me. And so you can drop your ballot in the mail, you know, as we have in the past. You can bring that signed, sealed ballot with the affidavit filled out to the election table and drop it in our drop box at the sidewalk celebration. You can sign and seal your ballot there if you choose to do that. And the other thing that you can do is you can walk up to the election table and say, I'm a new resident, I didn't receive a ballot, or my dog ate my ballot this morning, and so I don't have a ballot that I can vote. What can you do about it? And according to the plan that I presented, what we can do about that is we will, at that time, take the voter's name and address, immediately send an email to the contractor, say, please cancel the ballot for John Smith at 1234 Thornapple, whatever the address, and please issue that voter a new ballot with a new control number and mail it by overnight, for overnight delivery, to this person at his address. And so by the next day or 2 days later, I'm not sure which it would be, the voter would then get that ballot and vote it by dropping it in the mail. And we allow 2 weeks from election day, from the 10th, from May 10th. So we allow 2 weeks. It's actually more than 2 weeks, to the 27th is the day that we came up with, and I guess that could be modified, but the general idea is you want to have really enough time so that ballots aren't being, you know, limited or, you know, because of mail delays or whatever, that we aren't losing votes, we aren't losing ballots in the mail, you know, whether they're sitting in the basement of the post office or when I was growing up, there was a scandal in the Chicago post office where some mail carrier was discovered to have like 10 years of mail in his basement. So we want to guard against that as well. In other words, we're leaving enough time for ballots to actually get there. So election day is the date by which most people will have mailed their ballots. You can bring it to the election table, drop it in a mailbox, and then we will send them by courier to be counted, or you can request a new ballot at that time at the table there, and we'll go through the procedure I just described. So, you know, I view that as fully addressing the problem of voting on the day, on election day. And I wonder if there's any comments or thoughts on that. Andrew, does that address your concern, and does anyone else have thoughts on this?
My really quick comment is, Peter, you said getting them in by the 27th. It's the 26th is what we had agreed to, because the 27th,
Okay,
I think, is a
26th.
Friday night.
That's fine.
And we said it was the 26th, which is
Okay.
Thursday.
Good plan.
Seems okay.
Yep.
Okay, can we accept that? Can we vote on that and accept that that's the general plan?
Yes.
Okay. Ask for a vote. Let's see, anyone want to make a motion? Such an elaborate procedure.
Okay, I'll move.
Okay,
Yeah.
anyone want to, do we have to do
Seconded.
this every time, Niles?
Yeah, so it's good to have the motion because it all the motion does is make it clear what you're voting on. Because when
Okay.
you're writing up the minutes of the report, you want people to know exactly what you're voting on so that it makes sense.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's basically voting on the voting provisions in the election rules and procedures as I drafted it. And sent it to everybody a few days ago.
Was
I second it.
all right.
Okay, we're ready for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And real quick, sorry, are we voting on the principles or are we voting on the written text? Because I think in the written text there were some dates in the version that you sent
So-
that I had corrections to.
What I would
Let's correct the dates. We'll
Yeah.
go through
Okay.
the whole set of dates
All
next. That's the next thing I want
yeah,
to talk
but I think for the purposes of this, you can vote to agree to the timeline, and then you can go through and update the dates. Because last time you voted on the dates anyway, so all we're doing here is voting that this agrees with that. I think, and then you can go through and update the dates. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so next, let's move to the dates.
Mhm.
And so, okay, so we've agreed on election day being on May 10th. So
Yes.
I should say in the document that I sent you titled Draft 1113, 2022 Ordinance, Election Rules and Procedures, the dates got a little bollocksed up. So here's what we're proposing now, and I think this is right, but we can correct it now, get it right, and make a decision on this time schedule. So election day is going to be May 10th. We talked about that last time and agreed on it. So we have to go back 75 days for nominations to open. So where's my little calendar? Nomination. So we're talking about May 10th as day 0, and counting backwards, we get to day 75 on February 24th. So we're proposing to open nominations just slightly before that, on February 18th. So it has to be at least 75 days before the election. So 75 days exactly before is February 24th, and we have decided in the last meeting to do February 18th. Is that acceptable to everybody, or any thoughts, comments, great thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that that's our nominations open date. And then, so the plan is to leave 30 days from the date that nominations open to the date that nominations close. So if we're going from the 18th, so 4 weeks would be the 25th, March 4th, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be March 18th. So that would be the minimum amount of time. And so George very correctly has that as the date that nominations close. Personally, I didn't see any reason. Well, maybe there is a reason. Let's see. So that's day 53. If we move it forward 1 more week so that it's on March 25th instead, we're still within the requirements of the ordinance that it has to be at least 45 days before, because that's day 46 before May 10th. So counting backwards with May 10th as 0, May 9th is day 1, May 8th is day 2, etc. So that brings us to the 26th of March would be the day that we have to close the nominations, but we can close them earlier if we want to. So exactly 30 days would be the 18th, of March. I say, why not give people a little extra time, because it doesn't cost us anything. There's no countervailing consideration as far as I'm concerned. So I would be willing to do this on the 18th, to close nominations on the 18th, on the 25th also. So the 18th or the 25th, they're both Fridays. And, I guess I have a little preference for the 25th because having run once, I realize this takes time. People are trying to figure out what to do. They're struggling without writing these things, and a little extra time doesn't hurt anybody. So I would give them the extra week, so it would be 37 days, I guess, instead of 30 days. But there's no downside to that I am aware of. So any thoughts on that?
25th is fine.
Say it again?
25 is fine.
Okay. George, you'd proposed the 18th. Any thoughts?
You're muted.
Sorry. I proposed the 18th so that way we could go with what we had talked about and voted last time, where giving people a week from submitting themselves as candidates, and then they've got a week to put together their forms and anything like that coming over. And I think, I don't think it makes a huge difference. I think it's shifting a little extra time to people being publicized as candidates and a little less time for them to declare themselves as nominees. It's just kind of where we want to. Do we want that week to come out of campaign season, or do we want it to come out of nomination period? I leaned towards a longer period in which people are officially on the ballot and can campaign, but I really don't have a strong feeling either
Well, they
way.
still have to be working on their documents if they haven't sent them in yet.
Except for somebody else can nominate someone.
Yeah.
So another resident could nominate you, in which case you have to acknowledge that nomination, but say Paul nominated Leah the last day and said, hey, I want to nominate you. And she says yes. Does that really give them enough time to prepare the statement? That's the one caveat to that, is that. But on the other hand, that could be something that is
And
up to
now
the resident.
that's why the week was there. The week was for that instance to be as inclusive as possible. If somebody nominates their neighbor at the last minute and the neighbor says, yeah, I do think I want to do this, I want to throw my name in the hat, to give that person time to write their statement, get their conflict of interest and stuff done, instead of saying, okay, well, you got home Friday at 5, you have, 2 hours or whatever to get your nomination stuff done.
So Tiffany, you're assuming that the person who's nominating the other person doesn't want to say it until the last possible moment.
Or maybe
If we
Peter
give
was
both
just
of
a
them until the
conversation that was
25th,
Peter,
then
maybe
that-
it was a conversation that was had at the last minute, So out of respect, where we want as many people to be able to run as possible.
Well, I agree with that.
And
I do.
we want
We're both going to the same goal.
we want everybody to be able to put their best foot forward. Let's say it's somebody who gets, again, their neighbor catches them, and then they have a conversation that leads to, well, I'm gonna nominate you, and that person says, okay, but if it's the last day or the day before the last day, then that new candidate, that new nominee, doesn't have much time to turn around their response. So the reason in the past that time was given was to give that last minute nominee a chance to write a statement, compose it, talk about it with their spouse, whatever. And then all of the information would again go out at the same time. No candidate is getting their name out there before anybody else.
See, if we did it on the same the next, it just seems strange to me. Trying to think of this guy making the approach to his neighbor and saying, "Do you want to run? Can I nominate you?" Why would is he
It
going to be
seems to me-
conscious of the nomination deadline? And and otherwise he would,
Peter,
yeah,
it just seems to me that no matter what date we set, if somebody does at the last minute, it's still the last minute
yeah,
to get their stuff together. I mean, nominations are open till a certain time, and
yeah. But I certainly don't want to, limit people's time. I think that I'm in favor, as I guess Natalie is, of doing the 25th. And I think the 18th versus the 25th might be confusing to people. I don't think that's the traditional practice. And I would say just give everybody a little bit more time, including the two neighbors. I think if you want to nominate somebody, you should speak up. You should be aware of the schedule and speak up sooner. Any other thoughts? Anybody else have an opinion on this?
I favored the split just because building on what Tiffany said, we did it last year, and I think it works well by giving either people who are nominating someone else or someone who decides to throw their hat in the ring at the last minute. The candidate statements are the biggest campaign tool the candidates have, and I think giving them a clear, even if you decide on the last day that you want to throw your hat in the ring, you've got a week to put this together, make sure it's polished, make sure it's how you want it to look, what you want it to say. You're not trying to rush through something because maybe you decided on the last minute. And it means that
you have to have decided a week earlier.
Well, but it basically treats
minute.
everybody the same way. You're going to have an opportunity, whether you decided the first day or your neighbor came to you on the last day. You're not disadvantaged just because somebody didn't approach you and say, "I want to nominate you" until the last day. It's functionally, it's making sure everybody gets the same shot to prepare this materials. But I think it's a little bit of a, kind of 6 1 half dozen the other. But I'm in favor of giving that week for people to put together the materials.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of giving everybody the week, including the next door neighbor. All right, so let's do this. Anybody want to make a motion?
I motion that we do nominations close on the 18th and forms and everything are due on the 25th.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so it's the 18th and the 25th. Because, okay. So nominations close on 3/18 and documents due on the 24th. Oh, excuse me, the 25th.
Peter, I don't know if you saw the note I had added in the email. I'm going to once again throw my support behind being very explicit that the rule says it has to be in the committee inbox no later than 6. That came up last year where we wound up with technical hang-ups and all that stuff, and it was a little bit of a nightmare and required a lot of extra work and a lot of stress for everyone involved. And thankfully it all worked out well in the end. But I think if we are very clear up front about this is what the deadline means, what nomination period closing means, then I think that will eliminate stress for us once March.
So if it comes in 1 second after,
we have to have a deadline somewhere, and there needs to be a bright line. Last year, what happened was a candidate sent in an email where the language was a little ambiguous. They sent in an email at 11:59 and 57 seconds, and over the course of as emails moved through encryption and packaging and all that stuff, it didn't show up in the committee inbox until after the deadline because it was 5 seconds for the email to go.
right?
So that created an issue of what does this mean one way or the other. So I think if we're just clear about the deadline is maybe it's the email must be sent by this time or the email must be received in the committee inbox. Because last year the problem was it was on a server that the village uses before the deadline, but it wasn't in the inbox until later. So if we're just clear up front about what closing means, then I think it's reduces any chance
Okay.
for potentially stressful situations.
I've been toying with the idea of, being a little bit more open-minded about this and saying a 6 p.m. deadline and then giving people a 15-minute leeway or something. But I think it creates potential inequities. Some people may turn it in a little bit afterwards, and somebody else might not because they think, oh darn it, I missed the deadline. And then when he finds out that the other person got it in a little bit late, past the so-called deadline, but was accepted anyway, I could see where people might. So, frankly, I think, I think I'm agreeing with George on this. Anybody else? Any other views? Natalie? Or?
We're going with the sent or received time.
I think at the moment, George and I are both leaning in the direction of having a 6 p.m. deadline and 6:00:01 is not good enough.
So, okay.
Yeah, I'm in favor of received, not only just because in terms of traceability, that's the one where it's in the committee inbox by this time. We have access, if there was ever an issue, we have access to that info. We have access to those servers. We're not.
I just wanted to know whether it was one or the other, that's all.
Yeah, and I think in the plan it says it closes at 6, which means you could send it up through, or it's received by us up through 6:00 and 59 seconds, but as soon as that clock ticks to 6:01,
Okay.
it doesn't count anymore.
Okay. So, here's the proposal. That we have a deadline of 6:00 p.m. on March 18th for nominations to be submitted. In other words, I'm running. And then by 6 p.m. on March 25th, that is 6 o'clock and not 1 second later, for all documents to be received. And, so it's 6 p.m. and the keyword is going to be received and not sent, or received and not being transferred around the country on their inexplicable grid of electrical tubes.
Moving through the tubes.
So that's the proposal. Anybody want to make a motion? George?
I move that the deadline is 6 p.m. and 0 seconds, and the language is that it must be received in the committee's inbox.
Okay. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Done. Then, this is not really a mandatory thing, but we have to have a date by which Electech is going to send out ballots. So my presumption is that let's see, when would we want to announce to the public who the nominees are? On the next morning after the 18th or the next morning after the 25th?
So, can I just bring up one thing here? So the suggestion there, I think, would be based on the rules and everything, that once the forms are in, you're officially a candidate, right? So wouldn't it be like, say someone didn't get their forms in, but they are already announced as a candidate? That could create a problem.
This goes to the question
Yeah.
of what does the 18th really mean
Right.
in this case? I say I'm going to be a nominee, or a candidate, but I'm not turning in my papers till later, and gosh, maybe I'm not going to get them in.
Yeah,
So,
I think
so you're not really a
it's pretty
nominee
clear
until you're fully or a candidate until you're fully in. So the 25th,
Yeah, you're submitting a nomination. It's in the same way where it says, like, if you are nominating someone else, you have to include an affirmative statement from them that they accept being nominated. My interpretation
Along with their-
is the same
along with
thing.
their
Is
other
you have to have you have to email us with an affirmative statement saying I am nominating myself, or I accept that someone has nominated me, and they've got the 25th. But the benefit to that is we can put together the list to be ready to go on the 25th, and just if someone doesn't get their paperwork in, then we
Okay.
can just cross
Putting
that
that
out.
list together is not the work of a week, it's the work of a half an hour.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing I was just going to say about date is that following Monday, the March 28th, is when the newsletter would go out. So if you want to think of it as announcing the candidates, you can announce it as for March and for March, April, and May. The spotlight always in the newsletter is the election. So just saying that you could announce we'll have a separate packet that we can send out, but you can also announce it in the newsletter. So that newsletter date of March 28th is just a good date for the announcement.
Okay. Okay, so we will announce the candidates immediately after the 25th. Is that right? Okay. So documents in and candidates announced. All right, so everybody knows who the candidates are by the morning or sometime on the 26th or maybe the 28th. Probably the 26th we will send out some kind of general email if that's possible.
So so what we could do is if you have all of the information ready to go, we could send something out the night of the 25th. If it's going to wait a while, we could do it the 26th, or again wait until just Monday and then have the newsletter and the separate election packet all in one package, and then we would just do that. So you could, so it depends on how ready you are to go on that Friday versus the following Monday. So
okay, fair enough. Well, I think we should aim to do it as quickly as possible because people are curious and what's going on. Why are you holding this up? So by the 26th, approximately, or the 28th, the candidates will be announced and all their documents will be in, all their paperwork. So I think that we should give people some time to consider all of this before they get their ballots, and so I'm proposing April 15th, so that's about 3 weeks later, from the 25th is a Friday, so then 1, 2...
the 15th is also a Friday.
Yeah, so it's 3 weeks, so Electech should mail the ballots on April 15th. Okay?
Yep. So what we'll say is, what we could say is that either we could say, I mean, for messaging to the village, is either the ballots will be mailed to your house the week of the 15th, or say they will be mailed the week of the 18th, right? Or you will receive them by the week of the 18th. So it depends. So my question there basically is, like, what we'll have to do is, with the election provider, is prior to all of this, I'll have the committee have approved the ballot, what the ballot is going to look like, all of the instructions. The only thing that we'll have left over is adding people's names. Once we add people's names, it gets approved, we're good to go. So that means that what we could do is say the provider either is going to be mailing it out the week of April 15th, or it'll be mailed out the week of the 18th, or some combination thereof. We could tell people. But that is neither here nor there. People will receive them usually, within 2 or 3 days of them being mailed out, which is what happened last year. Most people, vast majority of people, got them, like I did it again on a Friday last year, and people started receiving them on Monday in a couple of cases. But, so it happened pretty promptly. So whatever we decide, we can sort of just tell people when it's going to be. And then I would suggest that we do the same thing we did last year. Just have an image of the envelope in the wrap-up and in the newsletter and such so that people know what they're looking for. So,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
It does. Okay. Good. So, on or about the 15th will be
Mm-hmm.
it'll be in the contract with whoever the
Yeah.
contractor is.
Mhm.
That ballots will be mailed on or about April 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have the forum in late April. We don't know the date yet because that has to be agreed upon with the candidates. And then really nothing happens until May 10th, which is Election Day. So that will be the standard sidewalk celebration, assuming nothing goes wrong with the Community Engagement Committee. I guess I don't know if they'll be doing any of the work
Mm-hmm.
on setting up the sidewalk celebration. I presume that they will. But so we should notify them that, that's our preferred date for the
Mhm.
sidewalk celebration.
So just so that you're aware, I brought it up briefly at the community engagement meeting. I told them that was your plan, that it hadn't been approved yet, so that they're aware. Okay, so once, they're planning next to meet in January, and that meeting they can plan the celebration on the sidewalk. But I just wanted to let you know that that's kind of where I brought it up so that it's on their radar.
Okay, very good.
Wait, sorry, Niles, did you say they're meeting next in January?
Yeah, that's the next time the community engagement committee will.
How did I not get that hookup as a council liaison? Every 3 months?
Well,
Just
they.
kidding.
I think you need to talk to the chairman.
Just kidding. All right.
I mean,
Go back on mute.
You obviously have been mistreated, so the chairman is your recourse.
Peter, I think the one other date that I think we needed to clarify is if we're having a separate date by which people have to notify the village office that they want to be added to the roll.
Yeah.
Because, with the provisions we talked about earlier, it's people can come in on the 10th and say, I would like something mailed, but that's I think, a different procedure than I would like to be added to the roll. And I know last year we said that was, I think, a week out because that gives Niles enough time to check it, and it gave the election service provider enough time to get it, mail them a new ballot, and for it to get back in time. So we might need to specify, in this case, I guess it would be May 10th. But if we think we could push it slightly, say, like, this is the last date you can be added to the roll.
Yeah.
So that would be May 2nd or 3rd, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that you're proposing. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. And, the putting a new person on the roll, the complication with that is that we have to find out what happened to the people who lived in that house previously.
So
if somebody's turning from 17.9 to 18, doesn't seem complicated to me. But if one person moves out, so they're off the roll, and somebody else moves into a house, so they're on the roll, that may take some checking and some time. So I think it's a good proposal. Okay, so we're going to say May, I don't know, 2nd or 3rd, George? Or Niles?
Yeah, I'd say the 3rd. Yeah.
3rd.
May 3rd. Okay, so that's the date for adding to roll.
And I think it's, Niles, last year we said it was like 5 p.m. on the 3rd, right? Because it's just
Right.
5 p.m. is when the office closes, and you have to reach out to the village office no later than 5.
Mm-hmm. And then and that gives time to send an email to the vendor, basically, right after that. So, 5 hits, everybody who's gotten in, you send it over, you do what you need to do with the voter roll and all of that stuff. So.
Yeah, okay, makes sense to me. Okay, and then last year, as I recall, some candidates felt that there wasn't enough time for the ballots to get to Electech to be counted. There were problems with the post office, and why can't we have an extra week? And so I'm proposing this time that we have a full 2 weeks between Election Day, when ballots, well, anyway, people can mail it whenever they want under, the current text, but if it doesn't get there by the 24th, 2 weeks after Election Day, they're out of luck. So we should tell everybody, mail early, but if it gets there late, that's too bad. So I'm proposing May 24th as the day at which ballots have to arrive at Electech to be counted. And indeed, I think the counting should take place on the evening of the 24th.
I thought we said we're counting on the 26th.
That's the announcement.
Yeah, we did. That's true. We did say that.
Yeah.
So that's 2 weeks and 2 days. So I'm fine with either one. I think that's enough time for even the worst post office delays to be resolved.
So, two quick things that I would say. One, last year, I know there were those concerns, but to the best of my recollection, there weren't any that took that long. Like, I think everything was in prior to the counting date. We didn't have any that showed up after that. And the second one, I think we're in a position where if we want to give people 2 weeks, then that makes it difficult to have an equitable approach to potential ballot curing. Because if we want to give the opportunity that the committee is going to reach out to people to cure their ballots, the ballots have to be in before we're doing counting, because otherwise a ballot that arrives that day, we can't treat it the same that we did a ballot that arrived earlier. And so if there's a deficiency there, that ballot can't be cured because we just don't have enough time. We have to count, we have to count at some point.
So I think this is a Niles question. Mm-hmm. How long do you think it would take? So suppose a ballot comes in that doesn't have a signed affidavit, or the affidavit isn't filled out, or in some other way the control number is right, but in some way is non-conforming. How long do you think it would take to address that? Typically, I think there are not a great many that come in that way.
Yeah, there's not many that come in that way, and I would say that depending on the procedures that you come up with, it could be relatively instantaneous. Like if we have identified them, and this is the other question that I'll go back to in a second. But once we identify a ballot that needs curing potentially, and by the way, I asked Ron just so that you know, Maryland, the state of Maryland, doesn't have any procedures around curing ballots, so any procedures that we come up with, we are allowed to create those procedures. We would just have to come up with them. So just that note. But once we have identified it, it's a simple process of potentially reaching out to the person and saying, "Here's the issue that has been uncovered with your envelope, and here's the process for which you can cure this deficiency." And then, depending on if they're in the village, it could be done very, very quickly. There's a couple. I mean, the only roadblock that I know of is that there's a few residents that I know of who are overseas, and at one point,
email addresses for them.
Right, we have addresses for them. I'm pretty sure almost all of them are back now. I think there's one couple that's still overseas, but that was just the one issue of, could you get it there and back in time if there's a problem with one of theirs? Because that's the greater one. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Niles, isn't context important for most of the committee here? I mean, I think last year there were about 428 ballots that arrived timely. And I think that there were only 4 that couldn't be counted. So we're talking less than 1%. And I think even Andrew was the one who was kind of like, these people didn't even try to fill anything out. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, it was different than those who didn't have anything on the outside of their ballot for them to fill in versus people who had things on the outside of their ballot and they made 0 effort. So you're talking about a process that would be post an extended election period in which you're waiting another couple of weeks to get ballots, and then to potentially be going to people after that for what is, less than 1% of last year's vote. I would encourage y'all to not be thinking about curing ballots.
So Peter, back to my original point, what I was saying is, I know the process of actually curing can be pretty instantaneous, but I think if we're saying we want to do curing, I think we would need to leave a couple of days, because if it's one where, if you only have a day, what if the person is traveling and they're on a plane the whole time and don't see it? What if they're at the hospital visiting a loved one? So if we want to do curing, we need to say ballots need to be in by, maybe we say it's 4 days or whatever,
Yeah, let's say
prior
the
to the
24th.
count. And then, I don't think if we push and say we have 2 weeks for ballots to come in, last year I don't think any of them took longer than that. There were a couple that showed up, I think we had a small handful that showed up the day before the count, none that I think arrived on the day of the count, and the ones that arrived the day before the count had all been postmarked well after the postmark date. So if we want to cure, I think we say the ballots have to be in by the 17th. Or if we say we're less concerned with curing because last year there were only 4 that would have required curing, but we want to make sure that post office delays is our bigger concern, then I think we can say, okay, they've got to be in by count day. But I don't think we can do both. I don't think we can do 2 and then have to cure, because then it just turns into a nightmare where it could extend on indefinitely before we can start counting.
I don't agree. I think we could say ballots have to arrive at the contractor by the 24th, which is a Tuesday. That's exactly 2 weeks from the election day. And then, so we would then, they would then identify all the ballots that are non-conforming to our specifications, contact us and Niles, or we would do this together. We would have a list of people whose, from the control numbers, we would know whose ballots they should have been, and we will then make an effort to contact those 3 or 4 or 5 people. And if we can't contact them by the 27th, it's too bad. So counting day would be at the end, close of business on the 27th. I don't see any complication with that.
26th. 27th is a Friday night.
What's wrong with that?
One, I think it's going to be harder for people to arrange schedules, and 2, there's a potential religious one if anybody, I think it is inadvisable to schedule official things like that on a Friday night because of the potential for religious observance.
Okay.
I mean, that's just my experience based on.
I'm glad George is explaining. George is explaining your religious obligations to you. Okay.
I'm not
Shabbos, Shomer Shabbos, Peter.
Yeah, I'm just saying, based off of when I have worked on election stuff in the past, we made every effort possible to avoid having anything be an official event that requires attendance.
But we could
on a
say
Friday night.
could say ballots in by the 23rd and done, cured or forgotten, or by the evening of the 26th.
If we think that the curing process, we can do it in 48 hours, then that's fine. But I think that's just where we want to be careful of. We can't design a curing process that involves a number of steps if it's one that we're trying to do it in the course of a really short time period.
I've heard a number of people express regret that, ballots came in late and they weren't counted, or there was some deficiency in the.
There were no ballots that came in late that weren't counted last year.
Or there were deficiencies in the affidavit.
There were 4 of them.
Right.
And
so let me just say, we have the control numbers, so we know which envelopes are valid and which are not, which ones were sent, are official ballots, and which ones aren't. If there's somebody sends in a fake ballot, we can tell because it won't have a proper control number, and may look non-conforming in other ways. So, the affidavit, in my view, is a legal requirement that there be an affidavit, but it's not really that important, right, in and of itself. So I think it's a technicality that is of no genuine value because the control number does the whole job. And so, if we can't cure it, well, it's supposed to be cured, so we have to forget it. But Um, I just don't see a problem. If we, have a couple of days to contact all these people, undoubtedly there may be one or two people we just can't contact, and their ballots are non-conforming, and I think at that point we have to assume that, that we can't count them. But everybody else, non-conforming, the affidavit isn't signed, or the handwriting's different, or, I sign my wife's and my wife signs mine, all of that is of little relevance to the actual vote and should not enter in. So I think giving people an opportunity to cure, I think the business about signing, your housemate's or partner's envelope is something that happens fairly often.
I don't think it happens that frequently, and that's also not something we'd need to cure. That's something that we could address during the count. They would be able to hold them up during the counting process and say, this one was, in my case, this one was issued to Catherine Miller, it was signed by George Mackley, and vice versa. We can just address that during the count. That's not one that requires pre-curing. The only thing that would require us to cure in advance would be if there is nothing, the affidavit is not signed on the back, or I would imagine the only potential other one that could come up that I wouldn't see where we would get into a process would be as if the ballot number was missing off the envelope and we had to try and run down this stuff.
It's always true that I think that there are people who don't follow instructions very well, and the fact that they don't follow instructions may end up biting them or hurting them. But that should, in principle, that shouldn't be a reason why we discount their vote.
But I think the details of curing are something we can address later. I think just for now, it's just the timing of how long, if we want to do curing, how long would we need to leave for that? When do they have to be in? So that way we would have enough time to do an actual, if we're caring about curing, how long would we need to actually cure it before a vote counting on the 26th?
Okay, so I would say let's require that they arrive before the 23rd. So that's one day less than the full 2 weeks, 13 days. And then do our vote counting on the 26th. What do you think? Think that'll work, Niles?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think the 23rd works. Mm-hmm.
Okay, any thoughts?
No.
Okay,
We waited an hour and a half.
I motion that we require ballots arrive at the election service provider by end of the day on the 23rd, and we count the ballots on the 26th.
Okay. All in favor? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So it shall be.
Are we finished?
Okay, we are not quite finished.
We can do the electioneering later on.
Is there an issue with electioneering?
No, we can just, time-wise, we can just add it to the end of another meeting.
And as long as there's no objection to that hasn't changed. So that's from previous plans. So I would say that that's fine as is. Unless somebody has a change, then just adopt it as is.
I think the only one I had flagged is we might need to put back in, the electioneering. We didn't have it last year because it was all mail-in, but this year if we have the drop box and sidewalk,
electioneering a certain distance from.
Yeah,
right.
We might need to put. I think we can just reuse the old language.
Yeah, we have previous language there, and as long as the committee is okay with it, I can send that around. But as long as the committee agrees to use the previous language on electioneering, which I think was from 2019, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, yes, you're right. There's no, electioneering-free zone listed. So, what do you say we just follow Niall's suggestion that we pick up the old language and append it as subsection D of the electioneering section of the. Is that okay with everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we'll just make a note and standard.
Yeah.
All right, so any other issues with the document, the election rules and procedures that I sent around, apart from all these changes in the dates that we've all agreed on, and we all have a record of that now, so that it will get changed. That will get changed in that way, and I will append the. Niles will give me the language, and we'll
Yep.
append that.
I'll email it to
The
you.
electioneering part.
Mm-hmm.
Any other changes
No.
proposed?
Just the stuff, Peter, I think that I had raised before, and I raised in my comments about adding the new language around certification and all that stuff. I think certifying the voter roll, I think going back to the language from 2019 and using that leaves us the option that we can, if we want to build out specific standards for what that's going to look like, we can do that over the coming months. I would be in favor of just using the 2019 language on.
What is the 2019 language? What does it say?
Yeah, I can pull that up too. Hang on.
Yeah, I had it on my computer. Let me pull it real quick. In the who can vote section of the 2019, the committee will utilize the most recent electronically available village qualified voter roll, voter contact information to verify residents' names and addresses. I think if we leave that,
That's fine. I view that as meaning we're going to use this, but we are verifying, right? The committee will verify, and so I'm completely comfortable with that language. We will use the most available information to verify, but we're still verifying.
Yeah, I think verifying, I think where I ran into the question was around the language around, I think in one of the versions of the plan, it said we're developing the voter roll, which I don't think we're developing. I think it's verifying the voter roll, and there's language in one of the plans that talked about certifying the voter roll, which I didn't see in any of the other ones. And I think just using the old language works, and we can build out exactly what that process looks like, as kind of you and I discussed, of making sure it's something that's documented, readable, and transparent about how exactly we're handling that process.
The sentence that I have in the document that I sent around is the committee shall verify the election roll, and the chair of the election committee shall certify the election roll by signing it before forwarding the voter roll to the election service provider. So, chair shall certify the election roll by signing it. That's another way to do it. So you prefer the old language?
Yeah.
Okay.
And to George's point, just to raise, and we don't have to address this now, I am working on stuff for the procedures, as well as what state law is, which I'm going to send around to everyone. But what it says about the county voter roll versus our voter roll, and that will clarify some stuff as well. Okay.
Okay, my battery's going.
Yeah.
That's right. I think
Okay,
using the old language.
I'm fine with either language. So if George wants the older language, that's fine. I thought it would be useful here to say how we, what the end point of that is. But we have to do it one way or another. So we can resolve that later. So I'm fine with George's proposal. Any objections to that?
No.
Hearing objection, no objection, so ordered. Okay, let me get that gavel. Okay, there we go. All right, so we are now going to vote on the election rules and procedures document that I sent around dated 11/13. And so with the changes to the dates, to the electioneering language, to the certification of the voter roll, with those exceptions, that's the only ones I can recall, or that I have a note for. With those changes, let's vote on the election roll as it is now, because this has to come from the committee. It's not just from one member, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I move to vote on, or to advance the voting roll as we've discussed, amended to the committee.
Sorry, just to make it clear, the language, the election plan
election plan.
Yes.
to approve the election plan with stated amendments, with amendments from tonight.
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
And so move.
Okay, need a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have a majority. All right, so this is approved. Thank goodness. Now, I know we're really close and we're over our hour and a half. I'm doing my best. Did we do anything about the legal advice issue last time?
No, you didn't. You didn't get to it last time, so I think it's just worth. You discussed it 2 times ago, and so it's just a question of. I think that where the consensus was about having the committee vote to if they wanted advice. I think that was the consensus, but I don't think there was a formal vote.
So I would say let's go ahead and vote. Do we want the committee to have the right to ask Ron for legal advice should the need arise?
But we're saying the committee has the right to request this from the council.
No,
Yeah.
I'm saying that we have the right to do it even if the council might.
No, I think
think it's.
I think we have to request it from the council to give us the authority, and so we're voting to ask the council to give us that authority.
Yes, we're asking now for the council to give us the authority, should the need arise, which I don't really anticipate it will most of the time, to resolve, questions that arise by going to Ron for legal advice. Okay, anyone
Right.
want to make a motion?
Also move.
Okay, so moved. Second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good, done. One more question. In my conversation with George over the weekend, he suggested that we develop a Dropbox or Google Doc account to store memoranda relating to procedures, what we did, why we did them, how it could be improved, et cetera, to store them all in one place and to create exactly that kind of, place to hold all of those reference documents for future election committees. I think it's a great idea. I'm in favor of it. I have no idea really which is the preferred technically preferred way to do it, Google Docs or Dropbox or whatever, but I'm in favor of doing it. And so, I'd like to propose that we delegate George and Leah to investigate the preferred way to do this and make a proposal at our next meeting.
Accepted.
Okay, excellent. All right, so that's the proposal. Do I need to get a motion on that?
no. That stuff is administrative. So as long as
Okay.
you guys want to figure out how to combine administrative forces, that's fine.
Okay. All
Can
in
I just
favor?
ask for a clarification? Will all of this eventually be saved on the at martinseditions.org so that we're complying with
Yeah.
our requirements under the Public Information Act?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the plan would be, and I think that will be part of what Leah and I will do is identifying the right one and putting together the processes to make sure that the materials are being maintained and recorded and shared year to year and shared on the right thing to comply with all the records keeping acts, but having this as a tool that is available for kind of file sharing within the year and over year to year, I think is we'll figure out what exactly that looks like and what kind of sub stuff we're going to have to do to make sure that it works and complies.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
I can't think of anything else for us to do. And therefore, by the power vested in me, and you with my gavel, I hereby call the meeting adjourned. I promise not to use the gavel ever again. It was a joke to begin with. I
You
apologize.
have to motion to
You
adjourn.
so
Oh,
yeah.
I know you're all powerful, Mr. Chairman, but I think you still have to motion.
Yeah.
ask for someone to motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Is anyone interested in Paul, perhaps? Would you like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, appreciate it. Okay, any seconds?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. Okay, we're done. Thank you very much, guys. And I promise no more gavels, and we will try hard to stick within the hour and a half deadlines at future meetings.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's sometimes a little tight, but at least it's not 3 hours. Okay,
Right.
thank you, everybody.